Okay, have you seen this water called Liquid Death? Tons of sales. People buy this stuff up like crazy. And I'll never forget what Mike Connell said. If you don't know who Mike Connell is, he's a pastor, deliverance minister out of New Zealand. Phenomenal man of God. And he said, anytime you see a huge cult following quickly around something, usually it's spiritual. And he's right. And so I saw everyone run to this Liquid Death thing. And it's funny, as I realized as I got older, I never thought about this once, but words have so much power, as well as agreements and covenants. What I mean by that is drinking something called Liquid Death. There is a power to it that people are agreeing to. Just as when they stand in front of a mirror and claim that they're ugly, or that they're a failure, or that they're a bad person, or whatever. There's agreements, and there's a power in an agreement. And so, gosh, the more I think about it, there's stuff is everywhere. Recently, there was a big, rise up of people who are upset because on Fortnite, there was the character Morbius, who I don't know a ton about, even though I'm a big Marvel comic geek. But he's kind of like this, I don't know, bat, evil kind of villain guy. And there's a part in Fortnite where he's sitting on a throne, and your character can come up to him and it'll give you a prompt to press X. And by pressing X, it will say you'll sell your soul. And by selling your soul in the game, you're given abilities and powers to do different things in the match or in the level. Now, to most non-Christians, they will think we're crazy for thinking this is a big deal, or that someone shouldn't do it. But there's a power there and an agreement that's being made. Now, even though a person can't sell their soul, what they can do is allow a doorway to be opened where the demonic world can torment someone, and that they can come in just like a squatter and hurt that person and torment their mind, torment their thoughts, torment their life. And so it's funny, it's just little things like that. There was even a show recently where they were talking, it was a show about witches and witchcraft, and one of the actresses had admitted that they had studied actual witchcraft incantations and spells to be spoken out into the show. So when people are watching that, they're realizing that that stuff is being spoken out in faith in their home. Some of you have heard me tell this story, but years ago, we put my son to bed, and before we put him to bed, Jen and I were watching the Ted Bundy documentary. And if you've ever watched it, golly, it was awful. It was just horrendous what this man had done to women, like really sick stuff. And while we were watching it, we realized it's Callan's bedtime. I go to put him in his bed, and I recognized there was something in his room. I could feel it. And I've had stories like this in the past that I've shared of demonic activity, and I knew something was in his room. And so I set him down, and I began to speak out and, curse this thing. And then I left to go back out and watch the rest of it with Jen. And when we got done with it, Jen was like she had slime poured all over. She was like, ugh. She was like, can you just pray over the house or something? Like, this just feels awful. So I did. I prayed and blah, blah, blah. And then the next morning, my son woke up and told us that he had a dream. And in the dream, there were these monsters, and the monsters were throwing him in a cage. And they were punching him and kicking him. And they wouldn't let him leave the cage unless he gave the password, which was 666. Now, he knows nothing of the significance of the monsters, the cages, 666. He knows nothing of this, so he just had this dream. Now, what happened? What happened was I allowed authority of something other than me and other than God to speak out in faith in my home. Because the words have a power. The agreement has power. I had agreement with what was being shown on the TV. So now the agreement is there. The demonic activity can commence because I've allowed them to. I've spoken it out and I've said you can. So they spoke out in faith. What had happened? It's the same with everything. There was a scientist a while back who gave this is years ago. This is not even a Christian. And I remember hearing about this from Dr. Emoto, where he was studying water and he was putting different bottles of water in contact with written messages. And on some of the messages, it would say, I love you. Some of the messages, it would say, I hate you. So difference in the positive and the negative messaging. And when he had frozen the samples and studied them under the microscope, all of the positive messages had created beautiful, symmetrical, crystals under the microscope, and they're beautiful. And all of the negative ones had distorted, asymmetrical, ugly structures under the microscope. And he had found, wow, literally, like even not a spoken message, a written message in contact with it is so powerful that it changes the molecular structure of the water. And he goes, so if we're made up of 80% water, what happens when a person stands in front of a mirror and begins to speak these things out about their life? And that's just in the written message. We've all seen it happen with the plant. There was a school that had 2 plants and they had the kids go up and speak life to one plant and negatively to the other plant, and the negative one died. Now that's just on the level of the power of our words. When you take into account Christianity and authority and power and all of those elements, and then bring in the agreement, man, it's like we're a target. So Christians have to be so careful, not just because we're these crazy, kooky people, but because there's power there. If I let my son go play Fortnite and he clicks on the selling the soul, so many non-Christians would think we're crazy. Like it's just a video game. No, it's not. There's an agreement. And the agreement allows the activity. Agreement will always allow the activity. So for most people, if they're tormented in their mind, they're tormented in their home, typically you can always trace it back. Something Pastor Mike had taught us a while back was anytime I come across someone who's under torment, there's something going on, you can say, how long has that been happening? And they'll say, whatever, years, 8 months. Okay, what happened 8 months ago? And you will almost always come across an event, an agreement, a time, something that happened that allowed the activity to take place. Sometimes it's not in our hands. Sometimes it could have been like an accident or something that opened up a doorway and the doorway allowed it. But just how my children can be affected by something I did because I allowed agreement of the authority in our home, it's the same thing. So as a Christian, that's why you got to be careful, because people don't realize you can so easily fall into an agreement on something and not realize it. And so just wanted to share my thoughts around that. I know it'll piss off people regardless, but I'm telling you, once you become a Christian, things work differently in the kingdom than they do in the world. There are some things that are the same. A lot of things are not. So careful what you agree to.